Imagine waking up to the sound of loud laughter and music, only to find your backyard, your private space, completely taken over. Two entitled sisters, both known for their dramatic care and attitude, decided my pool would be the perfect venue for their fancy bridal shower. Without asking, without warning, they marched in, decorated everything with balloons, flowers, and streamers, and filled the area with screaming guests snapping selfies. My home was turned into their stage, as if my property belonged to them. At first I stood there frozen, unable to believe the audacity. When I confronted them, they waved me off with smug smiles, insisting I should be honored that my pool was chosen for their special day. The gall, the arrogance, it was almost unreal. They splashed around, posing with cocktails, acting as though they had rented a luxury resort. Every single photo, every single video, was meant to showcase their perfect bridal shower. But they had no idea that payback was already brewing. My pool had recently been cleaned with a strong but harmless chemical that tinted the water, a striking shade of blue when mixed with sunlight. Under normal use, it looked crystal clear. But once dozens of them jumped in, the reaction kicked in fast. Within minutes, their skin and hair started to pick up a bright, glowing blue hue. Selfies turned into screams. Elegant dresses ruined. Makeup streaked down bright blue faces. Their perfect photo shoot was destroyed forever. Instead of classy bridal memories, all their photos looked like a Smurf-themed disaster. They stormed out furious, but the damage was done. They stole my pool, but I stole their spotlight. Saturday mornings in my neighborhood were usually peaceful. Birds sang in the trees, sprinklers ticked softly on freshly cut lawns, and the occasional dog barked at a passing mailman. I loved those mornings, especially in summer. My house sat on a quiet corner lot with a tall wooden fence that kept my backyard private, a little sanctuary I worked hard to maintain. The pride of it all was my swimming pool, crystal clear, always spotless, surrounded by a neat deck with lounge chairs and pots of flowers. It was my escape after long work weeks that morning. I had planned nothing more exciting than coffee on the porch and maybe a dip later in the afternoon. But as I stirred sugar into my mug, I caught a sound that didn't belong. Laughter, loud, high-pitched and multiplied. It was mixed with the thump of music, a bass line rattling faintly against my window. I frowned and set the mug down. The neighborhood wasn't rowdy. The sound wasn't coming from the street, it was coming from behind my house. At first, I thought maybe some kids had climbed in to use the pool, which would have been shocking enough. But when I drew back the curtain and looked out, the sight that hit me almost knocked the breath out of my chest. There they were, the Karen sisters. I called them that in my head long before this incident, and I wasn't the only one. They lived a block away, two women in their late 20s who thrived on drama and entitlement. Always overdressed, always complaining too. Managers at stores, always believing the world revolved around them. And there they stood right in the center of my backyard, decorating my pool as if it were a rented venue. Streamers hung from my patio, balloons bobbed in the water. A folding table covered in white cloth sagged under the weight of cakes, drinks, and flowers. Chairs were arranged in rows. Guests in pastel dresses milled about with phones in hand, and one of the sisters, her blonde hair in a carefully styled updo, was literally posing on the pool steps as if she was some kind of celebrity. The other, wearing a sash that said bride-to-be, was shouting instructions to a photographer. My jaw dropped. For a long moment, I just stood there, unable to comprehend it. My private backyard had been transformed into their bridal shower venue, and I hadn't even been asked. Heart pounding, I pushed the sliding door open and stormed onto the deck. "Excuse me, what on earth do you think you're doing?" My voice was sharp enough to cut through the music. Heads turned, but instead of embarrassment, I was met with blank stares and smirks. The bride-to-be barely glanced at me. "Oh, relax," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "We just needed a pool, and yours was perfect." "Perfect," I sputtered. "This is my property. You can't just walk in and throw a party here." Her sister, holding a champagne flute, laughed. "Don't be so uptight. It's just for today. Honestly, you should be honored. Not everyone gets to host such a fabulous event." I could hardly believe my ears. Honored. They had trespassed, invaded my home, and brought 30 strangers into my backyard, and I was supposed to feel honored. Guests sipped their drinks and snapped selfies, some whispering, others outright laughing at my outrage, as though I were the one being unreasonable. I felt my face heat up. "This is illegal. You had no permission on. Pack up your stuff and get out." The bride-to-be tilted her head, fixing me with a patronizing smile. "Look, we didn't think you'd mind. You barely use this pool anyway. How do you know what I use?" I shot back. My hands were shaking with anger. "This is my home. You had no right." She shrugged, then turned back to the photographer. "Can we hurry with these shots before the lighting changes?" The audacity left me speechless. My protest had been brushed off as if I were background noise at their event. Guests clapped along to the music, kids splashed in the shallow end, and the air was filled with the scent of perfume and frosted cake. It was a circus, and I was the intruder in my own yard. I stood there, torn between screaming, calling the police, or marching inside to grab a garden hose and spray the entire crowd down. My fingers twitched with the urge, but then a flicker of thought calmed me. Let them enjoy their little show. Let them think they'd won. They had no idea what was about to happen, unbeknownst to them. I had treated the pool the day before with a specialized chemical that kept algae at bay. Perfectly safe, perfectly harmless, but with a funny side effect. When exposed to heavy use in bright sunlight, the chemical caused skin, hair, and clothing to pick up a temporary blue tint. Normally, with just me swimming, no one noticed a thing but 30 entitled party guests. Oh, the pool would notice. So I crossed my arms, leaned against the patio railing and watched. They laughed, they shouted, they posed for endless photos. The sisters, of course, were the stars, taking center stage with their manicured nails, fake tans, and designer dresses. They clinked glasses, splashed their feet in the water, and announced to everyone how perfect everything looked. My blood boiled, but under the anger, a seed of satisfaction began to grow. They were building their little tower of vanity higher and higher, and soon, gravity would do its work. I caught sight of my reflection in the sliding door glass. My expression wasn't furious anymore. It was calm, steady, even amused. For the first time that day I smiled, because sometimes revenge doesn't need to be planned. Sometimes it's already waiting like a storm cloud on the horizon, ready to drench the people who thought they owned the sunshine, and those two sisters had no clue the storm was already here. The party carried on as though my fury meant nothing. Guests laughed and splashed, music thundered, and the Karen sisters floated at the center of it all like smug queens. They had draped leis around their necks and were posing together in the shallow end, holding cocktail glasses high as though this was some glamorous photo shoot. My jaw was clenched tight, my hands stuffed into my pockets, but inside I felt the tiniest thrill of anticipation, because I knew something they didn't. It didn't take long for the first signs to appear. A young woman in a bright pink dress was sitting on the edge of the pool, dipping her legs into the water. She suddenly frowned and rubbed her shin. "That's weird," she murmured. Her friend leaned closer, eyes widening. Is it just me, or does your skin look blue?" I nearly choked on a laugh. I bit my tongue and leaned casually against the railing, pretending to scroll through my phone. The girl's confusion spread quickly. Her calves now glowed, faintly turquoise in the sunlight. She splashed water on her leg, expecting it to rinse off, but the color deepened instead. Her squeal turned heads. "EW, what's happening?" she cried. The pool didn't stop with her. Two boys splashing each other in the shallow end froze mid-play when their arms turned the same bright shade. One gasped at the other. "Dude, you're bloomy, look at you." Panic flickered across the guests like a ripple in the water. Laughter shifted into nervous chatter. People clambered out of the pool, staring at their arms, their faces, their legs. The turquoise glow spread with astonishing speed. Makeup streaked down cheeks in neon rivers. White dresses turned blotchy teal, and hair picked up an almost cartoonish shimmer. And then came the shriek. It was the bride-to-be. She had been floating on an inflatable swan, posing like Cleopatra. When she looked down at her hands, "What the hell is this?" she screamed, shaking them wildly. Her carefully manicured fingers were bright blue. Her sister rushed over, stumbling in her wet heels, but gasped in horror when she caught her own reflection in a phone screen. Her blonde curls had transformed into seafoam green tendrils. "My hair," she wailed, clutching the strands as though they might fall out completely. "It's ruined. Do something." The pool had become a scene out of a nightmare, or from where I stood, a comedy show. Guests scrambled to grab towels, but drying off only smeared the color more deeply. A few shouted accusations, demanding to know if the pool was poisoned. Others, half-dressed and dripping, sprinted out the gate, terrified they'd be permanently stained. The decorations they'd so carefully placed toppled in the chaos. Balloons burst. The cake table collapsed. Drinks spilled into the grass. I leaned on the railing, my face set in the most innocent mask I could manage. "Everything okay over there?" I called sweetly. The bride whipped her head toward me, her face streaked turquoise and mascara. "What did you do?" she screeched me. I widened my eyes, feigning surprise. "I didn't invite you here. Remember, you broke into my yard. You wanted the pool. You got the pool." Her sister's face twisted with rage. "You'll pay for this. You've destroyed our bridal shower." I couldn't stop the laugh that bubbled out. "No," I said calmly. "I think you destroyed it yourselves when you decided my property was your playground." The shouting grew louder as more guests realized they were stained. Phones flew up as they tried to take selfies of the damage, but the photos only made things worse. Every camera captured their glowing blue faces in brutal detail. What had started as a luxury Instagram-worthy event was now a Smurf-themed disaster. One woman held up her phone in horror. "I look like an alien. Every picture is ruined." The bride snatched the phone from her, only to drop it into the pool. In frustration, she screamed again, collapsing onto a chair and burying her glowing face in her hands. Her sister tried to comfort her, but her own turquoise arms made the gesture look ridiculous. Guests began slipping out one by one, embarrassed and furious, muttering about how they'd never attend another event hosted by the sisters. And through it all, I stood like the calm eye of the storm, sipping my now cold coffee. The bride's mother arrived late, sweeping in with a hat wide enough to shade half the yard. She stopped dead when she saw the scene. Soggy decorations, ruined outfits, blue-streaked guests storming out. "What happened here?" she demanded. Her daughters turned on her at once. "It's her fault," the bride shrieked, pointing a dripping blue finger at me. I raised my brows. "Funny. From what I saw, you two broke into my yard without permission, trashed my property, and threw yourselves a party. Don't twist this around. I could call the cops right now and report trespassing." The mother's jaw dropped. "You wouldn't dare. Try me." I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering dramatically over the keypad for the first time that day. Real fear flickered in their eyes. The bride sobbed, her carefully constructed image collapsing with every tear. Her sister cursed under her breath, glancing around at the ruined scene. The mother sputtered threats, but even she knew they were powerless. Their shining day had been shattered, not by my hand, but by their own arrogance. Finally, with muttered curses and stomping heels, they gathered what scraps they could and slunk out the gate, leaving behind soggy decorations, overturned chairs, and a yard that looked like a storm had ripped through. The last thing I heard was the bride's strangled cry. "Our pictures, they're all ruined." When the gate slammed shut, silence returned at last. The birds picked up their songs again, and the water in my pool rippled calmly, now tinted slightly brighter than usual. I let out a long breath and smiled to myself. They had stolen my pool, but the pool had stolen their spotlight. I wandered back inside, leaving the chaos behind. Revenge, I realized, sometimes doesn't need planning. Sometimes, the universe just hands it to you wrapped in turquoise ribbons. And as for the sisters, well, their perfect bridal shower was over, but the humiliation, that was only just beginning. By Monday morning, the whole neighborhood knew. It didn't take long. Word spread faster than wildfire when you live in a suburban bubble where gossip is practically the community sport. By the time I stepped out to grab my mail, Mrs. Langley, from across the street, was already waving me over with her usual conspiratorial grin. "Did you hear?" she asked, eyes gleaming. "The bridal shower from hell." I played dumb, leaning casually against the mailbox. "Oh, what happened?" She lowered her voice, as though she was sharing national secrets. Apparently the Roberts sisters, that was their real name, though I still called them Karens in my head, decided to use someone's pool without permission. Can you imagine? And then something in the water turned them all blue. Blue. I saw pictures on Facebook. I raised an eyebrow. "You don't say." Inside I was cackling, but outwardly I gave her nothing more than a sympathetic shake of the head. "That's awful," I murmured. "Awful for them anyway." By lunchtime the story had already evolved into legend. Neighbors whispered about it. In driveways, teens shared memes in group chats, and even the cashier at the local grocery store asked me, "Did you hear about those sisters?" Turned into Smurfs at their own party. The part that made it even sweeter. Their own guests had leaked the photos. Dozens of pictures had been snapped in panic that day, and though the sisters tried to control the damage, it was hopeless. The images of them in their smeared makeup, glowing turquoise dresses, and hair gone seafoam green had spread across every corner of the internet. Someone even edited one into a movie poster: "Bridezilla meets the pool monster." Another meme, to have them side by side with characters from Avatar, complete with glowing eyes. I couldn't resist scrolling through them that night, laughing until tears rolled down my cheeks. The sisters had wanted a glamorous, Instagram-perfect bridal shower, but instead, they'd gone viral for all the wrong reasons. Of course they didn't take it quietly. The very next afternoon, I spotted them storming into the community association office. I happened to be dropping off recycling nearby and, naturally, lingered within earshot. Their voices carried even through the closed door. "This neighborhood has no respect," the bride shrieked. "We were humiliated. Someone poisoned that pool," her sister chimed in, her tone dripping with rage. "We demand the association do something about this. Our reputations are ruined." I stifled a laugh behind the recycling bins. The poor association clerk sounded exhausted as she tried to explain. "Ma'am, trespassing onto someone else's property is against community rules. If you weren't invited, we didn't need an invitation," the bride snapped. "That pool was just sitting there." I nearly dropped my soda cans from laughing. By the time they stormed out, their fury was clear on their blotchy, makeup-free faces. They spotted me walking back toward my house and glared like I was the villain of their story. I smiled and lifted my hand in a friendly wave. "Afternoon, ladies. Nice weather we're having." They didn't reply. The following days only deepened their misery. Every time they left the house, whispers followed. At the bakery, I overheard two women chuckling, "There go the Smurf sisters." At the gas station, a teenager snickered, "Don't let them near the car wash or they'll turn neon." Even the mailman confessed he couldn't look at them without thinking of cartoon characters. Thought maybe they'd finally learn humility. But no, Karens never don't. Instead, they tried to fight back online. The bride-to-be posted a furious rant on Facebook, claiming I had deliberately poisoned the water to sabotage her special day. She wrote paragraphs about my jealousy and hatred of love, as though I had nothing better to do than ruin her happiness. Unfortunately for her, the comments didn't go as planned. Wait, Weren't you trespassing? One person wrote, pretty sure using someone's pool without permission is illegal. Another chimed in, LOL, maybe don't steal people's property for clout. Hundreds of laughing emojis flooded the post. Memes stacked up in the replies. By the end of the day, she deleted it, but the screenshots were already everywhere. I almost felt bad. Almost that Friday, I was sitting in my backyard, enjoying the peace that had returned, when I heard the faint hum of voices on the other side of the fence. Curious, I peeked through a gap. There they were, the sisters, sitting on their patio with their mother, plotting revenge. She humiliated us, the bride hissed. Everyone thinks we're a joke. I'm not letting her get away with this. Her sister leaned forward, her turquoise-stained hair now bleached to a brittle straw color. We'll sue her. We'll tell everyone she booby-trapped at pool. That chemical must be illegal. Their mother nodded firmly. We'll make her regret ever crossing us. I ducked back before they could spot me, shaking my head with a smile. Sue me. For what owning a pool they had no right to touch. If they wanted a legal battle, they were welcome to try. I had photos, witnesses, and the simple fact that they were trespassers. But their words confirmed something else. They weren't just embarrassed. They were vengeful. That as I lay in bed that night, I thought about it. The sisters had already dug themselves into a pit of humiliation. Their anger, their denial, their refusal to accept responsibility was all fuel for the fire. And if I knew them at all, they'd only keep digging deeper. I didn't need to lift a finger. The neighborhood was already laughing. The internet was already roasting them, and their own pride would do the rest. But still, part of me couldn't resist the thought if they wanted war, maybe I'd give them one. The following week began with an unusual stillness. For a few days, I barely saw the Roberts sisters. No dramatic driveway arguments, no screeching laughter carrying across the block, no parading up and down the street in their matching outfits. It was as though they had gone underground, licking their wounds in private. But if there's one thing I knew, it was that Karens never stay quiet for long. On Thursday evening, I got my answer. As I was watering the flowers in my front yard, I spotted the two sisters strutting down the sidewalk together, their heads held high, their mother trailing behind like a shadow. They weren't dressed casually, they were in full battle gear, heavy makeup, stiff hair sprayed into place, and business jackets that looked borrowed from a lawyer's closet. They stopped in front of my driveway, hands on hips, and the bride-to-be spoke first. You think you're clever, don't you? She called out. I turned off the hose and raised an eyebrow. Excuse me, you humiliated us, her sister chimed in. You poisoned our party, and now everyone in this neighborhood thinks we're a joke. I crossed my arms. You humiliated yourselves when you trespassed? Don't twist it around. The bride thrust a crumpled piece of paper toward me. We're filing a lawsuit. You'll be hearing from our lawyer. I leaned closer, suppressing a laugh. The paper was clearly a template they had printed from. The internet, half the blanks weren't even filled in. That's cute, I said dryly. You do realize I have every right to call the police for trespassing. You're lucky I didn't. Her face flushed crimson beneath the layers of foundation. This isn't over, she screeched. Then, with a dramatic spin, they stormed off. I watched them go, shaking my head. A lawsuit, please. They couldn't even fill out the form correctly, but something told me they weren't stopping there, and I was right. 2 nights later, at around midnight, I was jolted awake by a noise. Outside footsteps, hushed whispers, the metallic rattle of something scraping against my gate. I slipped out of bed, grabbed a flashlight, and crept to the window. My heart gave a jolt. The sisters were back. They had crept into my yard with buckets and bags. I squinted and realized what they were carrying: powdered dye, the kind used for cheap color bombs. They were dumping it into my pool, giggling like children. Their plan, it seemed, was to stain my water red and ruin it. I almost burst out laughing. They thought they were pulling the ultimate prank. But they hadn't considered one thing. I had cameras. I flipped open the app on my phone. And sure enough, the infrared feed from the backyard camera showed them in perfect clarity. Their pale faces glowed in the night vision as they dumped bucket after bucket, whispering triumphantly. The bride tossed her hair and whispered, "Let's see her swim in that mess." I hit record for a few minutes. I let them carry on. It was oddly entertaining, watching them crouch and scramble, their powder blowing back into their own hair and staining their clothes. By the time they were done, they looked like a pair of circus clowns, streaks of red and purple smeared across their arms and faces. When they finally tiptoed out, I stayed quiet. I wanted them to believe they'd succeeded. The next morning, I strolled outside with my coffee, glanced at the pool, and smirked. They'd dumped in so much powder that the water was tinged a strange muddy red. But what they hadn't realized was that my filter system was powerful. By midday, most of the color had already been flushed out. By evening, the water was back, to its sparkling blue. And me, I had pristine video footage of their midnight crime. I debated whether to call the police right away, but something held me back. Why end the show so soon when the curtain had just risen? Instead, I decided to let the neighborhood see for themselves. That weekend, at the block's monthly barbecue, I brought my phone. People gathered around in folding chairs, kids ran in the yard, and the smell of burgers filled the air. When the gossip inevitably turned back to the sisters, I casually pulled up the video and said, "You all won't believe what I caught on camera." Gasps and laughter rippled through the crowd as the footage played. There they were, the Karens themselves, caught red-handed, literally, their hair and faces smeared with dye, bumbling around my backyard like burglars in a slapstick comedy. Mrs. Langley nearly fell out of her chair laughing. "Oh my goodness, they look like raccoons in a dumpster." By the time the video made the rounds, it was over for the sisters. The humiliation from the bridal shower had been bad enough, but now they were officially the clowns of the neighborhood. When they showed up at the next association meeting to demand action against me, people snickered openly. Someone even whispered "Smurf burglars" under their breath, and the room erupted in muffled laughter. Their mothers shrieked about harassment and disrespect, but nobody took them seriously anymore. As for me, I just smiled politely, hands folded in my lap. I didn't need to raise my voice. The evidence spoke louder than I ever could. By the end of the meeting, they stormed out once again, humiliated and fuming. That night I sat by my pool, the water sparkling peacefully under the patio lights. I thought about everything that had happened, the trespassing, the blue disaster, their desperate revenge attempt, and the way it had all unraveled. It struck me then. They were their own worst enemies. Their arrogance, their entitlement, their refusal to take responsibility, those things had set them up for failure long before they ever stepped foot in my yard. All I had to do was stand back and let the consequences roll in. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't finished yet. They'd embarrassed themselves twice now, but something told me they weren't the type to learn a lesson. They'd come back again, angrier, more reckless. And when they did, I'd be ready. Because if there was one thing I'd learned through this whole ordeal, it was simple. When you steal someone's pool, when you stomp all over boundaries, and when you think you're untouchable, the water always finds a way to rise against you. And the Karens had barely begun to drown. After their dye-stained midnight stunt backfired, the Roberts sisters went quiet for a while. At least, that's what it looked like from the outside. The gossip cooled, the memes slowed, and for a brief moment, the neighborhood returned to its normal rhythm. I mowed my lawn in peace, sipped coffee on the porch without interruptions, and even swam in my pool without fearing another ambush. But deep down I knew them too well. Karens never fade quietly into the background. Their pride simply won't allow it. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, they returned with their most outrageous scheme yet. The morning began like any other, sunlight streaming through my blinds, birds chirping in the yard. I was halfway through breakfast when I heard trucks outside. Curious, I peeked through the window. What I saw made me drop my fork. A full event crew was setting up tents, chairs, and tables in my front yard. Not the backyard this time, the front yard, in plain view of the entire street. A banner flapped in the wind. Robert's bridal shower. Round 2, official makeover party. They had decided to redo the entire event, bigger and louder, to prove they weren't beaten. Their logic, I later learned, was simple. If they hosted a second bridal shower and flooded social media with perfect photos, maybe the neighborhood and the internet would forget the disaster of the first one. The sisters strutted around in matching white dresses, barking orders at the workers their mother supervised like a general leading an army. Guests began arriving within the hour, pulling up in cars, unloading gifts and drinks. Music blared once again. My jaw clenched. This wasn't just trespassing, it was outright invasion. My front yard, the very entrance to my home, had been hijacked for their ego. I stormed outside. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted over the music. The bride stoopy smirked, adjusting her sash. "We're rewriting the story," she said smugly. "This time it'll be flawless. You can't just set up in my yard." I snapped. "This is private property." Her sister rolled her eyes. "It's just grass. Stop being so dramatic. Besides, everyone will see this event. Do you really want to be the neighbor who ruined a bride's special day twice?" That line sent my blood boiling. They were trying to guilt me, to turn the blame on me yet again. But this time, I was ready. Without another word, I pulled out my phone and called the police. The sisters laughed when they heard me. "Go ahead," the bride scoffed. "The cops won't stop a bridal shower. You'll look like a monster." But 10 minutes later, the flashing lights of 2 squad cars pulled up to the curb. The music cut off. Guests froze, whispering nervously. Officers stepped out, hands resting casually on their belts. "Whose property is this?" one officer asked. "Mine," I said firmly. "And whose event is this?" The sister stepped forward, still trying to look confident. "Ours," the bride announced. "We're hosting a bridal shower." The officer raised an eyebrow. "Did you have permission from the homeowner?" They hesitated. "Well, we didn't think we needed. That's all we need to hear." The officer cut in. "This is trespassing. Pack it up." Now the bride's mother screeched in protest. "This is harassment. She's targeting my daughters. This is their moment." But the officers weren't buying it. They ordered the crew to dismantle the tents immediately. Guests scrambled to their cars, embarrassed and whispering about what they'd just witnessed. Sisters protested, screamed, and begged, but nothing worked. Within 30 minutes the yard was empty except for a few crushed paper plates and the lingering smell of wasted champagne. The best part, neighbors had gathered on sidewalks to watch. Phones were out, cameras rolling. Every second of the meltdown was documented. By that evening, the videos were circulating online under the hashtag #KarenShower 2.0. The sisters had wanted to rewrite the story, but instead, they had doubled their humiliation. The final blow came a few days later when the community association called an emergency meeting. This time, it wasn't just gossip, it was official business. The Roberts family was on the agenda. The meeting room was packed, neighbors whispering in excitement. The sisters and their mother sat stiffly at the front, arms crossed, trying to look defiant. When their turn came, the association president spoke plainly. After reviewing multiple complaints, video evidence and police reports, we have decided to fine the Roberts household for repeated violations of property rights, noise ordinances, and community guidelines. In addition, they are formally banned from hosting any events within the association grounds for the next 2 years. The room erupted in applause. The bride-to-be jumped to her feet, face red with fury. This is unfair. She sabotaged us from the beginning. She pointed directly at me, shaking with rage. She ruined our shower, she ruined our reputation, and now she's ruining our lives. But her tantrum only made things worse. Neighbors booed. Someone shouted, "Take responsibility for once." Another yelled, "Stay off other people's lawns." The sisters stormed out, their mother trailing behind, muttering threats under her breath. And just like that, it was over. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood quieted down again. The sisters kept to themselves, rarely leaving the house except for errands. Their online accounts went dark, their friends stopped visiting, and their once loud presence faded into silence. They had wanted fame and admiration, but they'd earned nothing but ridicule. As for me, I returned to my peaceful weekends, sipping coffee on the porch and floating in my pool. Sometimes, when I glanced at the rippling water, I thought about how the whole mess had started that one stolen day when they decided my property was theirs to take. They thought they could control the story. But in the end, the water had spoken, louder than they ever could. And the lesson was clear. Steal someone's peace, and you drown your own reputation.